So I see the next slide on my laptop. Okay. Hold on. Switch it on. Okay, like yesterday, I'm still Tobias. Still about rocks in the RC. I'm not going to say much about my past, like yesterday. Today, it's about slangs or sub-languages. And before we go deeper into details about slangs in Perl 6, we just have to think about what are slangs in our languages, for example, and what is the relation about programming languages. When you think about slangs in programming languages, you mostly think about this. It's all about the syntax. But when you look at Wikipedia, for example, and you take a look for slangs, it's more about dialect of languages itself. And a dialect is mostly about 5 things. For one thing, it's about the phonology, how you pronounce it, how you speak it. That doesn't really apply to programming languages, because it's not about the same written word that's spoken differently. Then you also have the morphology, like join is a verb, but depending on the context, you would not change this word slightly, so it has a slightly different meaning, so we keep it as it is. So there is no morphology in slangs in programming languages. Then dialects are about lexic. That means, for example, when you use a module, then you pull in a lot of features, a lot of subroutines, and of course a lot more words to use to talk, basically. So yes, we have that. And syntax, of course, like this example. First line is Perl 5 code. You see there's no comma behind the block. And the other 3 lines are Perl 6 code. They do all the same. It's just a map of this range. Even the for loop can produce values that you can say or assign to a variable. So yes, we have syntax or syntax changes. And dialects are also about an idiomatic use of the language. When you talk to different kinds of people, you use a different kind of talking. So if you're talking with your friends or with the boss, it's perhaps a little bit different. And we also have that. This is a perfect idiom to pull in named parameters and stash them into a hash. The second line is exactly the same for Perl 6. And yeah, there's no such thing for PHP, sadly. When you Google for named parameters in PHP, there are large discussions about that, but yeah, there is only the way of passing an array with values. So, yes, we also have this. So, 3 lower things are what driving our slangs in our languages. And now, we basically have already slangs in our languages, even when we even really know about it. For example, this is Perl 5 code. We just shoved some values into an array. We call a subroutine that's not declared yet. So this subroutine has, by default in Perl 5, takes a slurpy array and slurps all values there. And this slurps the entire array, but only shifts 1 and returns it. So we say just the 1, and the others vanish within that subroutine. Then we declare the subroutine with a prototype that only takes 1 argument. And later we call it like this, we can get rid of the parentheses. That in that moment we are changing the grammar of the Perl 5 parser to only give this first argument to foo, and the 2 and 3 are passed to say. And since foo returns our argument, it says 1, 2, 3. And in the last example, since this expects a scalar, this gives us the number of values within the x. Yeah. So this is already modifying the grammar, which means this is a slang in Perl 5, basically. This is Perl 6. You are able to declare operators like infixes or postfix or prefix operators like subroutines. Also as multi-subroutines, for example, for different cases, depending on the type that are involved. And this is the factorial example. It's pretty short, but pretty self-explained. This is the actual operator you're going to use later. And you're getting the thing it was applied on. And then you return something, and as you see, it works. Okay, this is nice, but my talk is more about stuff like this, that we really mixing different languages. For example, you start with Perl 6, of course. Say something to standard error, and then have a block with another language, like Perl 5, for example. Both blocks do the same. They say Linux on my box, or Win32 perhaps on our box. Okay, so this is the most interesting part. Use V5 because this does something. So, okay. There are several reasons to perhaps use slangs. This is maybe the most obvious. You have some Perl 5 code and you do not want to write it again in another language like Perl 6 because it works and you don't want to touch it, you don't want to reinvent it. This little regex only passes, yeah, it just looked that big on the screen. It just passes URLs and not even all URLs because it needs the .com top-level domain. So it even needs to be extended for other kinds of URLs. And we just declare the subroutine in Perl 5 code, and later we switch to the Perl 6 code and just call it as subroutine at the version Perl 6. Which is nice. Okay. This piece of code, we know that we want to that we need a particular feature of a Perl 5 CPAN module, and perhaps the Perl 6 module with the same name does it kind of differently. So we can just declare a Perl 6 subroutine and use modules inside that are only visible within this subroutine, switch to this language only within the subroutine, and fiddle with the module and return something. Another nice way to do that is to import Perl 5 modules like that. The from adverb is passed to the module loader that locates the module, and in this case it goes off and only searches for Perl 5 modules. In this from there can also be the name JVM. Then you could do some JVM stuff. This is also possible. It's not a slang in this case, but it's the same principle that you can take modules from other languages. And in this case, since the slangs return proper Perl 6 objects, you can just use them as such. You can call methods on it the Perl 6 way and pass arguments. Okay. Back to this example. I hope you can see it. The yellowish code is the proper Perl 6 code. Then we have our language switching statement. They use v5 that does some magic. And then we have the proper Perl 5 code. And this kind of works like this. This is what Perl 5 in short provides. There is this is actually the grammar within Perl 6. It has, of course, code for its use statement and keeps track of the current main language. And if a module changes this main language, it will continue with reading the next statements in the statement list of this other language. So let's go on. This is the interesting statement. And the Perl 5 slang looks a little bit like this. It means we have a grammar, the Perl 5 grammar, which defines all the statement lists, statements, tokens, and so on that are known to Perl 5. It has action classes, which build the AST. Get to it in a little bit. And also has an export subroutine. This one shows the Perl 5 into this main variable. And this is an export subroutine, so every time you say use v5, this subroutine gets called. So every time you write it down, you switch the language. So these are the most important things at this point. So, okay, so we know what language this is in what case and what it does. And now we come to an interesting bit. Perhaps not everybody knows how a parser works. It's actually pretty simple. It takes a piece of text, your source code, and turns it into a tree of operations. And this is what happens here. We have our grammar. The grammar is a huge regex that reads in your code and has match objects that are like a parent and child relationship, and this gets turned using the actions classes into an abstract syntax tree with operations and so on. Okay, so far so good. We can turn this into this. And the nice thing about this AST for Perl 6 is that when the v5 module produces an AST, it's not only an AST for parent, it's always the same AST. It's called cast. So you can always have the same AST that you can use for several backends. So when you write a slang, for example, you only have to care to produce one AST and the backends do the rest. So you don't have to care what is the backend. If it runs later as operations on the JVM or in MoVM or parent, and yeah, we'll call C functions, for example, you don't have to care. You only have to care about one AST. Okay. And this is also a nice benefit if there's in future another backend, for example, like JavaScript. It should work out of the box, because this backend knows how to handle this AST and turn it into backend specific operations. Okay, nice. We have this. We have an AST out of our source code. And the AST later on, when we have switched our language, is like this. The green one should be like Perl 6 code, and the orange is Perl 5 code. So we just inject this Perl 5 AST into the Perl 6 one, and we have a huge AST which does all the work. Okay, so, but now to another example. We have an outer Perl 6 code which declares a variable a, which is of the type int, and when we say it in Perl 6, it does not just print nothing because it's undefined. Say does give you gist of something, so it's not like print that it gives you something for machines to read. It is something for humans to read, so it prints this instead. So you know it is an integer but undefined. It's like we have for every class or type we have in Perl 6, the type object itself is the undeclared value of this class or type. So what do we want to have in Perl 5? When we say the very same variable, of course we want to have an empty string. When we turn warnings on, should perhaps write something down for us that something initialized was printed. And in fact what it does is not to call .gist on this variable, it calls the subroutine p5 say, which knows how to turn a variable into a string. And later on, when we switch back to Perl 6 and want to say the variable again, we of course want to say this, want to see this, which means that we cannot just overload these kind of objects, because this would mess up with Perl 6 blocks the later output. So we really want to have Perl 5 behavior only in the Perl 5 block. Yeah.
Would you be able to put a string into A in the Perl 5 mod?
In what?
In the middle there where you have used V5,
Yeah.
would you be able to store a string into A?
Yeah. Because $A is just a Perl 6 object. It's always a Perl 6 object here. I could a string.
But the
Oh no,
variable is type of
no,
an
I understand. No, you can't put a string on it because this variable has still the constraints on it.
Okay, good.
So yeah. Then you put constraints on it here. Perhaps it's read-only, for example, a constant. You cannot get rid of it in Perl 5, which is hopefully safe. Okay. How do we achieve it that we have different behavior in these different kind of blocks, even when we inherit from a Perl 5 block? This is like a P5 string subroutine works simply. It switches using the type and does the different kind of transformations, I would say. So a boolean is not printed as true, it's printed either as 1 or empty string. And it does, the subroutine is printed as code and some memory address as a hex value. So. And here is the warning that gets printed in case warnings are turned on for the category uninitialized when the string you're trying to print is uninitialized. Okay, so Rakudo Perl 6 has a coded setting where all its built-ins are declared, like the P5 string we have seen now. It's like a built-in for the P5 module. This core setting in Rakudo Perl 6 is like more than 20,000 lines of code. And it looks a little like this. There are first some roles stubs and variables declared, and all these infix operators are declared as Perl 6 code inside this setting. And we do something similar in Perl 5, in the V5 module. It's called Perl 5 terms. It's only 1,000 and almost 500 lines of code, but it's increasing steadily because the way Perl 5 does different stuff depending on what's in the variables differs quite a lot from Perl 6. Okay. So the question is, what can we do today with the V5 module? Of course, we have support for all types of conditions. That means we have if, parenthesis, some expression, and a block with else if and so on, and the final else option. We also have unless, else if, else. I hope not too many people are using this. We also have the statement modifier, like in Perl 6. We also have the loops, like we have we at least passed the label. It's not yet possible in Perl 5 and V5 to go to next or redo labeled loop, but this will be, I guess, done in a week or two, because Perl 6 is recruiting Perl 6 is getting labels right now. We have the while and continue. We have the until and continue. We also have the C-style for loop. We also have the for optional variable declaration and the list, same as for each, with the continue blocks afterwards. And that's a pretty interesting thing. The single block, the closure in Perl 5 is actually a loop over a single item. You can put a label on it, you can redo, last or next it, and you also can put a continue block on it for some reason, if you need to. We also have git blocks that run at compile time. When you compile your code, this block will get run before it turns on to parse the rest of the script. We of course have use and require, which means that if you are in switch to the Perl 5 Slang and use a module, it expects that the module you use with the V5 Slang is a Perl 5 module. So if you want to include Perl 6 modules within a V5 block, you actually have to switch first to the Perl 6 language tag. Because Perl 5 has no way to say I use a module but in a different language, from a different language. So the V5 Slang is its goal is not to extend the Perl 5 grammar, language or features like other projects like P5, which is trying to get the major object protocol into Perl 5. The goal of V5 is only to make it work, not to extend it, which is pretty important. We have all these nice build-ins. There are a lot of build-ins missing, and yeah, it takes a while to get these in, because all these nice build-ins have their specialities, like reading from $_ if something is not passed, or other kind of weirdness. And we have all these nice operators. Yeah. We always have use overload, which was also kind of funny to implement. So we can also say use overload the stringifying operation, and return something that looks like how Perl 6 would print a type object. We also have subroutine prototypes. As we see before, this is about changing the parser, about how many arguments and what default arguments the subroutine would take. It would not get enough arguments, for example. We also have value subroutines, which work pretty nicely. Since in Perl 6 we have traits that we can apply to subroutines, we just say is RW, which is exactly the same that the L value here. So internally, when it parses the L value, it applies the trait of Perl 6. We also can declare variables like this. At the top of our program, for example, we can use warnings for different kinds of categories. We have a use strict, which is a kind of interesting aspect because Perl 6 only has strict. So it was a little bit of work to get relaxed mode by default into the v5, so that when it sees a variable that's not declared in our scope. Rakuten Perl 6 doesn't have that yet, so even for one-liners in Perl 6 you have to declare all your variables. To a certain degree we also have these core modules like config and English. Config is a bit hard because it exposes a lot of build time information, like what system was there when the compiler was built using a C environment. When you run on the JVM, you don't have that. You just have like 4 or 5 system values. So you get some default values for a 64-bit system. We also have use if, the pragma if, which allows you to conditionally use a module or pragma like strict, depending on information that are there during begin time, compile time, like here. So you can use something that only should be done when Perl has an version.
Question.
Yeah.
What's that variable actually set to in Perl 6?
Why? No, I don't.
What's the value of that variable if you run it in Perl 6?
This one?
Yeah.
It's 514 something.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Since we won't have that many versions of v5, I would say, my goal is to always apply to the latest test suite. So there will be someday 518, 520 in it when I compile with this, and will be upgraded when Perl 5 does new releases and this module applies to the new version.
Makes sense.
So yeah.
So it's the Perl 5 version, not the Perl version.
It's the Perl 5 version, yes. It's the fake Perl 5 version. The if pragma also has this nice thing. You can go to a subroutine reference, which is some sort of call with in Perl 6. That means you are calling this subroutine with the parameters you have got here and eliminate this bar from the call chain. Yeah. So you can delegate to another subroutine and pretend you were not even called. We have, of course, we have regular expressions. You can also, in Perl 6 code, you can say, use, for example, VM colon P5. Then you can use directly in Perl 6 the Perl 5 regex. If you're used to it and if you do not want to rewrite much, you can switch to it and use this. Otherwise, the default, of course, is the Perl 6 regex. In the v5 module, there is, of course, only this regular expression syntax available. You cannot switch to the Perl 6 regex mode because Perl 5 has no way to do that. We also have barrel file handles, which was a lot of pain to implement because this is 2 terms in a row principle. There's a missing comma. And this goes also for the indirect object syntax. I got like 5 times the story from Aaron Warren. Yeah, I think if we could do Perl 5, if we could go back and do it again, I think he would not do this anymore. It's just, yeah, it's just trace implement. Okay, what we probably, what we don't have now, but in near future is this. Yeah, as I said, 1 week, 2 weeks, I think. By then, the V5 module is hopefully a proper module that is installed on your Panda. This is kind of icky, and I think first Pro 6 will get it. Until then, we don't have it, and yeah, I guess I will implement it at the same time for both systems, for both languages. What we do not have now, and I'm not sure I'm going to do it, is bare words, because yeah, it's, I don't know if you have code that really wants to have it, that you turn something that could be a subroutine into a string just because. I don't know. It works in Perl 5, and there are tests that are testing this, but I don't care if they break, because I don't think I should make this work. And all modules that are there that are important on CPAN should be fixed to not use this, I would say. So yeah.
You can implement that with autoload, can't you?
Autoload?
Yeah?
Yeah, perhaps.
Generates
The problem is when you are here, it can be a subroutine that's not declared yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps this takes 3, perhaps not.
Right.
Yeah, that's why Perl 5 cannot pass your script in one run. It does it several times to know what works and what doesn't. And in Perl 6 we pass one time. When we have like a grammar, and we can branch into different kinds of things. When we have, like here we have a subroutine that takes an argument, and this argument can be a literal or can be a variable or something else, another subroutine perhaps. Then we try to, for example, we look for a signal for the dollar or the @ If it's not there, then this branch is eliminated, and we only try the other branches, and we only back off to this position until we're allowed to backtrack to. So we do some kind of look ahead and backtrack, but we do not pass your file several times to guess what's best, which is a plus because you can analyze your code better. Yeah, there are a lot of core modules that need to be either properly ported or re-implemented in V5, because things like these use XS, and XS is not possible. So yeah, these have probably to be ported to Perl 6 and should expose then Perl 5 compatible at the end. Which also have the positive side effect that we would have these kind of modules in Perl 6. So it's just one-time work, and then both parties are happy. And as I said, this is kind of impossible to do because we don't have, we have C structures for more VM backend and parent backend, for example, but we don't have SVs and PVs and all this stuff. So we can't make use of XS, can't provide it, support it, because the internal structure is totally different. Okay, some numbers. I've taken the test suite from Perl 5, as I mentioned earlier. We are passing now about 8,000 tests, which I think is pretty nice. When you see that I started this project, I think in, I don't know, summer last year. It was after the German Perl workshop in March, so I think, yeah, it started in March, actually. It can pass 42,000 tests. I think there are about 500 test files. And this is what Perl 5 actually passes, more than double. So it's a lot of work to get there, but yeah, it's fun. Okay. Yeah, that's it so far. I have like 5 minutes for questions. You can continue the discussion from yesterday.
Do you think it will be possible to go to a label in another of the languages, sort of outside of the V5?
Yes. Because you don't have to. Don't do it. But yes, if you have, for example, a Perl 6 loop and have a label there, it's just a lexical. It's just an object in your lexical environment. And if you have a Perl 5 or V5 block in it, this thing is there. You can say next label. And that's the reason why I did it that way, that I do not replace the entire parser, get rid of all the declared variables, and do all my own setting. That's why this V5 module produces an AST and just injects it into the Perl 6 program, so that you have all your variables around, you have all your subroutines, all your used modules that you declared before. Only then it's useful, I think, because the V5 module is also meant as a migration part, that you have an existing Perl 5 code. The goal would be to make it possible to run with almost non-changes to your code in the Perl 6 parser in Rakudo, and then slightly replace parts, so that you take, for example, a subroutine, write use 6.0.0 and write your Perl 6 code that does the same job, and then replace bit by bit or replace file by file if you want, like the Python people try to migrate using some sort of, I don't know how it's called, but they migrate
2 to 3.
2 to 3.
Yeah, they have to migrate file by file, I think. And yeah, this should make it a little bit nicer. Problem is, we need a lot of modules from CPRA, from the core, to actually do that, because as I said yesterday, when you have a dependency on DBIX class, for example, which is pretty useful, you have like 40, 50, 70 modules, it depends on. And these need to be there, or we just fake up DBIX class, expose the same IPA, but do not require any V5 modules because it's Perl 6, for example. This would work too. But yeah, there's one.
What about the smart match in V5?
Well, you have all the type informations, so we can do it the Perl 6 way. The question is if you want that, or if you want to try to fake the wrongish behavior of Perl 5. I guess we want the latter. So, I don't know.
Given it's deprecated in 5 anyway.
Yeah, I think I can pick. I don't know. But, yeah.
Do you think macros, Perl 6 macros will be possible to use in the V5 model?
You don't have any syntax for it in Perl 5?
But you're able to see this outside subs, right?
Again?
You're able to call a Perl 6 sub outside of your V5 scope.
Yeah.
And macros work the same way. The lookup is exactly the same.
Yes, then you can do it, yeah.
Okay.
So you cannot
Could usually set it for 5 code.
yeah.
Well, in principle you could. You can define it in the Perl 6 code, and then you just reach for it in the Perl 5 code, which is still completely Perl 5 compatible.
Yeah, then
Perl
it's
5 still looks
yeah.
like a sub.
If it's Perl 5 graded syntax, you can do that.
You could probably even inject operators in that way.
Yes. Also, when you call a method from the V5 block, and this method is a multi-method in Perl 6, it also does all these multi-method special, of course, because it's all the same.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay.